Well, we're joined now by Sean Spicer, who is the former White House press secretary who served under President Trump in his first term. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya English. I gather you're just about to release a new book, which will be your fifth. It's entitled Trump 2.0, The Revolution That Will Permanently Transform America. Sounds like we've got lots to talk about. Let's kick off with Iran. Does it look to you like we're drifting closer towards military confrontation between the US and Iran?
Yes, it does. I mean, you staged two carrier strike groups off the coast. That's a pretty big sign of escalation. The word that we're getting out of the White House, the president's considering several options, many of which include sort of what I would call surgical strikes, going in, taking out key assets, military bases, capabilities, government facilities, et cetera. The biggest problem that I think we face is the what next. You know, are we prepared to deal with regime change? And I'm not sure that we're ready to. The president has been famous for talking about getting us out of wars, not starting them. And when you go in and attack something like Iran, you have to inherently ask yourself what comes next after the strikes.
Right. I mean, what would be acceptable, do you think, to President Trump's support base, given that we're in an important year in US politics? And as you said in your answer there, I mean, President Trump did not campaign on a platform of starting new wars.
It's a great question, because I think what the president has shown, both in the first strike that he did with Iran and then secondly with the snatch and grab of Maduro, is that we can be very precise, going in, achieving a goal and getting out without a sort of a follow-on force. And that's what he wants to avoid, is some kind of prolonged, endless war that we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq in particular. So the problem that I think you fundamentally have with Iran is it's easy to do the strike piece, to go in, take out the capabilities, et cetera. The problem that his military advisors are having is, how do you tell him what's next? Do you require some kind of fundamental U.S. presence in the region for stability, to ensure a new regime comes to power, et cetera? And I don't know that you can give him that answer. I don't know that it's simple. It's not something you just say, this is how it flows. So to your point about what the base will accept, I think the base is fine with surgical action, going in, taking steps to prevent Iran from exerting, nuclear threats, et cetera. I don't think they're ready or desiring any kind of long-term follow-on force that would be there or even in the region.
How would you be advising President Trump? Were you still in your position there?
It's a great question. I mean, I think part of it, from my perspective, would be to talk about the media aspect, which is my wheelhouse, and say to him, look, this is where the base is at. If we can get some kind of action that is presented to you, a course of action that allows us to go in and inflict pain, maybe bring them to the table a little bit more, without inflicting so much pain that they would retaliate in some way, posing a threat to U.S. forces or assets, then I think I would be an advocate of that one. I think the problem is, as I said, you've got an issue with not only regime change, but what capabilities do they have to fire on U.S. forces and assets in the region?
Right, just before we move on to our next topic, just to wrap up Iran, I mean, you said at the beginning, these strike groups have been deployed to the Middle East, enormous amounts of military hardware, the largest aircraft carrier in the world is on the way. Now that it's deployed, I mean, turning around and coming back without having done anything, is that an option? And how would that look, not just domestically, but internationally? Could it be interpreted as weakness?
Yes, it could be. I think that's going to be part of the issue, is that you're going to have to get something from the Iranians that satisfies that question that you just asked, or you're going to have to conduct some kind of strikes where you take out assets and further the talks. But I don't think either side should, both sides should kind of come to their senses and recognize, if you're Iran, don't second guess this president. He means business. He has shown very clearly that he's willing to act. So I think that's important to understand. Secondly, I think the president, and he knows this, he doesn't need me or anyone else telling him, is that there is an issue with political sensitivities, not just in your base, but the country as a whole as we head into a midterm about foreign action.
Right. And just looking at what he might do next and which countries might get involved if it escalates, we've heard from the United Kingdom, a staunch ally of the United States, the UK saying it won't allow US strikes to be launched from bases in the UK. What does that tell us, do you think, about the state of this so-called special relationship between London and Washington?
I love this because it's so funny how Europe loves to lecture the United States about what it should do with its finances and military might when it comes to the region. Iran's not in our backyard. Like, it doesn't pose a direct and existential threat to us, but I think for the world's security and stability, obviously dealing with Iran makes sense. And here you have the Brits, when the going gets tough, they run the other way. It's very telling to me because they love to lecture us about how we should conduct our foreign policy and what we should be doing in Europe. But when it comes to the greater good, they're nowhere to be found. It actually was very disappointing to see this.
Okay, I mean, they may beg to differ when it comes to past American-led wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but just looking at what happened in Munich this year, I mean...
Wait, hold on. But just
go ahead.
Quickly. Well, there's a difference. I give them credit in both in Iraq and Afghanistan. They served nobly side by side with us. We're talking about using an air base in the UK to launch strikes. That's not asking for them to be part of it. That was just asking for them, and it wasn't even asking. As far as I know, they just outright said the Americans aren't able to use our facilities. That's far different than what they did. They were partners with us in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I think that this preemptive shutting it off because they didn't want to be perceived as going against Iran shows that, again, this just shows to me that they're not serious when it comes to this kind of stuff.
I mean, there have been a few sparks, haven't there, diplomatically between Europe, and that includes the United Kingdom, when we talk about the continent, and the United States. And at Munich this year, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio did sound a little bit warmer in his address than the Vice President J.D. Vance did last year. Do you think relations between the US and Brussels, well, in Europe generally, are recovering? Are they sort of heading back towards sort of warming up?
So I like to think they're more level setting, which is that for years, whether it's NATO as a whole or the EU, when it comes to both trade and our military arrangements, I think have taken advantage of the United States. On trade, there's a massive imbalance as far as how we are permitted to go into those markets versus how the Europeans writ large have access to the U.S. market. Conversely, when you look at NATO in terms of the percentage that most NATO countries were paying as a percentage of their GDP to fulfill their NATO requirement, it fell short. I think what both Vice President Vance and then to some degree Marco Rubio have done is to remind the Europeans that, you can still be friends without sort of imbalances.
Okay. And obviously, Greenland has been a sort of a dark cloud over that transatlantic relationship during the last couple of months. I mean, do you think President Trump was really serious about seizing Greenland, or was that somehow a piece of political theater?
Oh, no, he's dead serious. This is something that went way back to his first term. He understands the strategic importance that Greenland has to prevent Russian escalations. He also understands the importance that those critical minerals that are in Greenland have to combat the ascent of China. So he's dead serious. Now, what way that manifests itself, but I do believe that having a stronger relationship with Greenland, militarily in particular, is critical for the world's security.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like you think we've heard the last of the Greenland saga.
No, I don't. One thing you have to understand about President Trump, and it's interesting, I always find it fascinating because he lays it all out in his books, by the way, which is sort of like, for anyone who doesn't understand it, you can just literally go back to whether it's The Art of the Comeback, The Art of the Deal, and he walks through, but he sometimes will start at 10 and will settle at 5, which is where he wanted to be at the beginning, but he comes in with a strong hand in negotiations knowing where he wants to settle somewhere in the middle. So I don't know that a complete takeover of Greenland is necessary to achieve what he really wants, but he only knows what that's in the back of his head and saying, here's what I really want to get at.
Okay. Just looking ahead to the midterms, I mean, I don't know if you look at the opinion polls. I don't know if you think the opinion polls are credible, but the numbers aren't looking great for the Republicans. Are you worried about them?
Yeah, of course I'm worried. When you have a 1-seat, 2-seat majority in the U.S. House and a 3-seat majority in the U.S. Senate, you better be worried. You mentioned my book at the top, Trump 2.0. Part of the reason I wrote it was the contrast between our first term and what he's having now in his second term, why it's so consequential. And to be blunt, for everyone on the MAGA side of the equation politically, if President Trump loses the House and or the Senate, the policy comes to a screeching halt real quick. And we start going from enacting the Trump agenda into investigations and more impeachments. So part of the reason I wrote that book and why I think the midterms are critical is because the entire Trump agenda is on the line. So you would be an idiot in America not to be concerned. And there are some people on my side who think that everything's all roses and sunshine. I'm not one of those people. I believe that there's a limited number of districts. I believe that we are in a good shape. I think the polls are where they are, but I think President Trump made the right policy decisions on the economy, and that when you get into the second and third quarter of this year, when voters are really making that decision about who they're going to support in the midterms, I think everything is going to be firing on all cylinders with respect to the economy, and the president's going to be rewarded for that. I do think it, but like I said at the outset, it's important to keep your eye on this.
Okay. I mean, how much of a setback do you think it was for the president that the Supreme Court ruled last week against his decision-making on tariffs?
It wasn't great, but it also, as you saw, and I've been one of these people. I was the assistant U.S. trade rep in the Bush administration. So for at least 6 months, I've been saying that I thought that this was going to be the way that the ruling would go. It's a constitutional question. If you look at Article 1 of our Constitution, the Congress has the authority to deal with trade. And so it can't delegate that. But the one thing that I also said at the time is that the president would pivot to trade dispute mechanisms, which he's done. So the 122s out of the gate, 232s, the 301s, it's very wonky trade talk. But the bottom line is the court affirmed his authority on those fronts. He's going to pivot to them. The one thing I will say is it doesn't give him the same flexibility that he had previously had. So it was a bit of a setback, but he's going to continue to plow forward and achieve the same results.
Okay, and just lastly, we're nearly out of time, but I just want to go back to your book and just ask you, I mean, to summarize for us, I mean, what the key differences are between President Trump's second term and his first term. Is it as simple as saying he's more emboldened now? And I'd also like to ask you, as an extension of that, what do you think President Trump wants to be remembered for?
So I will say this, there's two premises to the book. The first is this, that when you have 4 years out of office, it was unbelievably consequential because you actually have an opportunity to think about what's going to be different. Every president except for one in our country's history has gone back to back. So what you're doing on January 20th becomes January 21st, 22nd, the same people, the same whatever. When you have 4 years out of office, you can actually stop, pause, and think about what you will do differently and how. And to your question about what's different, the people, the policies, and the process. They've had an opportunity to think, who do we want in this administration that's going to move the agenda forward? What are those policies that we want to push forward for? And then thirdly, what's the process? What are the forces that are going to help us get this done? What are the processes that are going to hurt us in our effort to do that? I think he's going to be remembered for what he's done on the border. I think frankly, there's a lot of stuff, tax policy, the MAHA agenda, keeping Americans healthy. There's a lot of things that he has really dealt with. I think the border for a lot of Americans will always be first and foremost. But I think there's a long list of things that he has achieved that he's going to be very proud of. I think in the first term, there was no question the court and his appointments were big. But going forward, I think he's got a lot of domestic achievements that will also kind of rival what he did in his first term on some of these policies.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and hope to have you back again very soon. Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary under President Trump. Thank you for your time, sir.
You bet. Thank you.